Today, we're going to talk about the Exodus. But I'm not just going to preach at you today. I'm going to show you pictures from the Holy Land. You've probably never seen the Exodus story in this light before. So, what does the Exodus mean? What does Exodus mean? What did the Israelites do? Yeah, exit. It could be like exit, but it means going out. And the Israelites went out of Egypt, but they weren't originally from Egypt. They were from the land of Canaan, right here. And there was a great famine in the land. And so they left Canaan and they went to Egypt. And we can see that in Genesis 12. And where they settled was a land called Goshen. I've been to Goshen. It's very lush land. It's very, very beautiful. And today, let's see if I can come up here and point without it humming at me. Tel El Daba. Now, this is a place that archaeologists believe is modern-day Goshen. And a little note on biblical archaeology. A tel is basically a mound of dirt where a city was built in a strategic location because of food and water and stuff like that. And what happens, this is a tel. What happens, since it's such a good location, people come along, and they destroy it. And then they build another city on top of it. Now, there's some of these tels over there in Israel. I've been to several of them. There's how many cities? Like 30, 40, 50 cities. And you can go back even 1,000 years on these tels. So this is Tel El Daba. And they found this house that's characteristic of only Canaanites. Now, a Canaanite house is like a horseshoe shape, where there was a courtyard in the middle to keep the animals. And nowhere else in Egypt have they found this structure, and archaeologists have dated this structure to the time of Joseph and his family. So when they came from Canaan to Egypt, they built this house. So we can have faith that the Israelites were in Egypt to start out with. So now we've established a starting point. There were people in Egypt. Now let's establish where Mount Sinai is. And so the first account of it is Moses' flight from Egypt. So he did not fly out on a Boeing 747. He ran on foot. And so, since we don't have a roaming mic, I'll just read this. Moses fled from Pharaoh. He settled in the land of Midian and sat down by a well. The priest of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. But some shepherds came and drove them away. So, Moses, we don't know where Midian is. Moses flees Egypt because he kills a taskmaster. So, he goes to Midian. But some shepherds came and drove them away. Moses got up and came to their defense and watered their flock. When they returned to their father, Ruel, he said, "How is that you have come back so soon today?" They said, "An Egyptian helped us against the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Where is he? Why did you leave the man? Invite him to break bread." Moses agreed and stayed with the man. And he gave Moses his daughter, Zipporah, in marriage. So Moses fled to the land of Midian. We don't know where that is. So he fled there, and he actually found a wife. You guys know how long he lived in Midian? Yeah, about 40 years. So he's there for a really long time. And something happens to him there. He's herding sheep. And what happens is he sees a bush. It's on fire. For those of you who don't know the story, there was a bush that was on fire. Moses went up to the bush, and he was shocked, and he heard a voice. And that's where he encountered God. God said, "Go get my people." And we know that this was near Mount Sinai. So we know Mount Sinai is in Midian. So there's a traditional place of the Red Sea crossing. The Sinai Peninsula right here, and they believe Mount Sinai is right here. But we know that's not true because there are archaeological evidence that it's in northwest Arabia. And the reason why we know this is because if you flee the authorities because you killed someone, do you go somewhere where there's a lot of police stations? No. Sinai Peninsula had many, many Egyptian armies there, outposts there. So we know he didn't flee there. And we know where he fled was where Mount Sinai is. So where is Midian? Paul, which is really interesting, some people say the Old Testament isn't valid today, but Jesus and Paul and people in the New Testament consistently quote the Old Testament. Paul says Mount Sinai is in Arabia and corresponds to the present Jerusalem. Even Paul says it's in Arabia. So there's a few things that we have to establish to find Mount Sinai. One is enough land for a multitude of people to camp. It says, the Israelites entered the wilderness of Sinai and camped in the wilderness. Israel camped there in front of the mountain. So, you guys know how many people came out of Egypt? Let's just say a lot of people. I believe the statistics were the line of people, people could still be leaving Egypt while people were many, 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 many miles away. So this is a lot of people. And then we also know the top of the mountain was scorched. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended upon it in fire. So we know the top of the mountain is scorched. And according to extra-biblical sources, ancient Jewish sources, it's the tallest mountain in northwestern Arabia. And also a presence of an altar. When Moses went up the mountain to Mount Sinai, he was up there, if you guys remember, 40 days. The number 40 appears a lot in the Bible. But he was up there for 40 days. The people thought he was dead. So they said, let's make our own God. So they took all the gold and silver and they made a golden calf. And they worshiped the calf. And in this verse, it tells us that Aaron made this calf for them, and he built an altar. So there has to be a presence of an altar. So what do we have with Mount Sinai? Enough land for a multitude of people, possibly even millions of people. The top of the mountain was scorched. The tallest mountain in northwest Arabia, and presence of an altar. So here's a map. The traditional place of Mount Sinai is right here. But there's another proposed place, Jebel Alaz. Have any of you heard of Jebel Alaz? No, you probably haven't. It just sounds like a normal Arabian name. And so here is a computer rendering of Jebel Alaz, a vast dry lake bed where this multitude could camp. The mountaintop is scorched. It looks like it could be shadow, but it's not. They've done tests on this mountain, and the burning goes down 6 inches. So this is not just someone pulling a prank on us. And it doesn't stop there. There is a giant rock pile here, which might possibly be an altar. Not only is there an altar, actually I don't have it in here. There's actually a rock nearby. You guys remember, the Israelites were out in the desert, and the desert doesn't have much water. They were thirsty. They were complaining. And God said, okay, I'll give you water. So he splits a rock from top to bottom, and the water flows out. There's a rock nearby that's 30 feet tall, split down the middle, and there is water erosion. I'm not saying that is the rock, but there are many, many, many possibilities. So we've established people in Goshen, in Egypt, and we've established where Mount Sinai could be. How'd they get there? Did they just walk aimlessly somewhere and down their way? It's very interesting. We actually see some ancient trade routes that go out of Egypt to different places. And it's another reason why we can guess that Jebel Alaz is Sinai. So the first route is the way of the Philistines, the way of Shur, and the route from Egypt to Midian. Can we have someone read this verse?
When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, although that was nearer, for God thought, if the people face war, they may change their minds and return to Egypt.
So have you guys ever wondered why they walked around for all those years? Why didn't they just follow the Mediterranean coast? That's exactly the route they could have taken, and that's probably the route the Israelites took, coming from Israel. But it says that God knew they'd be scared. And so it says they didn't take this way. And then the second route, the way of Shur, ends in the middle of the desert. Comes from here, ends there in the desert. It's not a place you want to go. But what's even more amazing is the third route. Trade route between Egypt and Midian in the Near East. This is probably the route that Moses took when he fled from Egypt. Today, it's actually a modern highway, but back then, the dirt was hard-packed and easy for a vast amount of people to walk, to travel on. And so that trade route, I wish this was a bigger picture, went like this, went above the Gulf of Aqaba and down into Arabia. And so we have a route, but the Bible tells us that there's a body of water. along this trade route, there is no body of water to cross. So, what do we do with that? The closest thing is the Gulf of Aqaba, and not the larger Red Sea. This is the Red Sea. This is the Gulf of Aqaba. And this is another gulf right there. But it's the Gulf of Aqaba that this trade route goes up and around, but the trade route goes around it. It doesn't go through it. So why did they cross anything? Well, it says in Exodus that God said, turn down so that Pharaoh will think you are trapped. God knew that he had to get rid of Pharaoh somehow. And if they would have just taken the trade route, Pharaoh would have caught up. It says Pharaoh could have caught up to them in 3 weeks. No problem. And so God said, I'm going to take this other route. But the problem with the Gulf of Aqaba, it's very rocky and there's cliffs everywhere. So it says, tell the Israelites to turn back and camp in front of the sea. Okay. Well, they camp in front of the sea. How many people were there? Many, many people. How do you camp on this when it's all cliffs? Does anyone see a possible place? Very obvious on here, especially with this Google map. It's called the Yucaipa Beach. And it's amazing that God knew that he would need a place for the Israelites to camp. This took hundreds of years. What happens is all the gullies, all the sand gets washed through when it rains. It comes through and it sediments. All the sediment settles there. And so this is big enough for the Israelites to camp. So I don't know if you could see how big these canyon walls are. This is in Petra in Jordan. This is part of a trade route, not the trade route from Egypt to Midian, but a trade route running from Israel down to Arabia. And these walls are huge. And this is how it was. And you could see the people and how tall this was. So there were large cliffs to the right and the left. And they, in all the movies, have you seen in the movies how it's all flat? And you say, just go around, just go around. You can't go around. So there's cliffs to the right and to the left, huge cliffs. The water to the front and Pharaoh at their back. And they say, we're going to die. And they said, you know what, God? You put us in this situation where there are not enough graves in Egypt. And it seems sometimes we do that to God too. We say, you know what, God, I'm sick and tired of this. Why did you let this happen to me? But there was a problem. God had an answer. Can we have someone read this? Let's unmute.
Okay. The Egyptians pursued them, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, his chariot drivers, and his army. They overtook them, camped by the sea. As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites looked back, and there were the Egyptians advancing on them. In great fear, the Israelites cried out to the Lord. Lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the Israelites may go into the sea on dry ground.
So we think, oh, it's okay. God's going to part the waters. They didn't know that. Imagine being trapped and an enemy army coming at you with over 600 chariots. Just think how scary that would be. So God parted the waters. Okay, they go on. No, there's another problem. The thing is, even with the water removed in the Red Sea, in the Gulf of Aqaba, there is a trench, like the Mariana Trench, and it goes down 1,500 feet. Very, very, very steep. All these people would not be climbing down this and climbing up. So, we have another problem. Even though God parted the waters, how did they get across? Well, you've got to have a plan. This is the only place in the Red Sea. There's a land bridge from that peninsula all the way out. The rest of the sea has this deep ravine. This doesn't. It's a nice slope like this. And when it's dry, it's hard packed. And nowhere else. And they've looked all over in the Red Sea. There's no land bridges like this. And also in other places that might be possible, there's too many coral formations. You can't get that many people even on dry land if there's huge rocks and coral and stuff. So God had a solution. One more problem. The chariots. The army of Pharaoh. Where are they? People say, if this really happened, isn't there evidence? Where are they? It says, Pharaoh took 600 picked chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers over all of them. They just mentioned 600. Then they take the rest of them. Where's all these chariots? If the Exodus happened, and it happened here, where's those chariots? We have a problem, as it would seem. These are coral formations there on that land bridge at Nueva Beach in the Gulf of Aqaba. It is not photoshopped at all. What does that look like to you? An axle. Now, are there usually right angles like this in nature? No. But people say, well, how is that possible? Someone planted that because wood rots. Yes, wood does rot. But God knew this. And another thing you need to know, coral will only form on hard objects. Nowhere else do they find these formations in the Red Sea. Because what happened, it was sandy beach. And with all those chariot wheels and axles, the coral attached itself to it. And some people say, why didn't all these other groups come and take it away? There's this law. You cannot remove, according to Egyptian and Arabian law, you cannot remove any coral from the seabed. So even someone who wanted to sabotage the Christian faith or the Jewish faith, they couldn't. This is still there. Here's another picture. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if it's my eyes just playing tricks on me. That looks like a chariot wheel. The left-hand side is the actual wheel. The right-hand side has been enhanced so you can see it. Here's another one. It's not just one or two. They're everywhere on both sides. So we know it's not just a couple people doing this. They have done extensive surveys of this underwater land bridge. It's everywhere. Only in this area. nowhere else. Nowhere else in the Red Sea. It is there. Now this is a gold-plated chariot wheel. What's interesting is the gold stayed while the wood rotted out from beneath it. Now what's significant, you'd have to know your history for this. That's a 4-spoke, and there's also 6-spoke. And so God is an amazing God, and during the time, and we have evidence of this, pictures painted on tombs in Egypt, and we know that the only time they used 4-spoke and 6-spoke, the time of Moses. So we know that the presence of both of those, this was from the time of Moses. This is how we know. It's amazing how God works. So all throughout the Exodus, there's a problem. There's a famine in the land. So God sends Joseph to Egypt. Not very pleasantly, sold as a slave, and sent Pharaoh a vision. And so Joseph was able to build enough food and grain storage to save the whole country, everyone, even from Canaan, from Syria, everyone. The Israelites were hungry. You guys remember, they're out there, they're wandering in the wilderness, and they're complaining, we're tired of manna. So God brought a great wind of quails. And the quails just blew in. And that's not just in the Bible. It happens. We have seen that today. Israel was stuck between the sea and Pharaoh. Another problem. God said, okay, I could do that. And get Pharaoh to stop following him. He had the water cover them up. Because God knew that if he didn't get rid of Pharaoh then, they would never get rid of him. And today we have a problem. People say, especially in the academic community, they say the Bible isn't real. There's no such thing as the Bible. There is no evidence. Sometimes I wonder if people are too smart to see what's right in front of them. To me, that looked like wagon wheels. It's very, very convincing. Even the route that they took is still in use today. Even the canyons that they walked down to get to the beach, that is a main road now. There's too many coincidences. And so we have this problem of these people saying the Bible isn't true. God gives us this. I believe it's more than a coincidence. Just as God delivered Israel from Pharaoh, God sent his Son to deliver us from sin. We have a problem. He has a solution. No matter what, even in your darkest hour, the Israelites were stuck between Pharaoh and the sea and the walls, and they didn't have any way out. Guess what? God said, watch, let me prove you wrong. And God does that everywhere in the Bible. It's amazing when you go to the Holy Land. I've been there twice, and you see everything. When you read about it in the Bible, it's not real. But when you go over there and you get to sit where Jesus sat and walk where he walked, and you see all this stuff, it's hard not to be a believer. Because you see it. And it's there. How can you reject the Bible? And just as God made a promise to Abraham, Isaac, Joseph, Moses. You could see God promising many people. He comes true on his word. What was Jesus' promise when he left? The way you saw me leave is going to be the exact way I come back. God has been true on all his other promises. It's going to be true on that promise.